They stopped her at the door, called her just another immigrant mom, told her the PTA meeting was for members only, but 5 minutes later, that same woman stood at the podium as the new chair of the school board, and when she spoke, she chose Spanish. If stories like this give you chills, subscribe. Because we tell the stories others ignore. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday. Gray clouds skimmed low across the rooftops of Jefferson Elementary, the kind that promised drizzle but rarely delivered, the kind of morning where your breath fogged up behind your mask and the coffee in your hand didn't stay warm for long. Parents in trench coats and athleisure pants buzzed like bees in the circular drive, waving goodbye to their kids, air-kissing each other, holding lattes like badges of suburban honor. Lucia Alvarez stood across the street. She had arrived early, 20 minutes early, to be exact. A habit she never unlearned since the day she took 2 buses to her second job. Punctuality, she always said, was the dignity of the poor. When you don't have power, you show up on time. Or better yet, before time. Her shoes were scuffed. Not out of neglect, but because they had walked through more than most would understand. Her brown leather bag overstuffed and worn at the edges hung heavy on her shoulder, filled with handwritten notes, old receipts, and a small Tupperware of arroz con leche in case she needed to skip lunch again. She didn't wear makeup, just chapstick. She didn't need to be seen, she needed to be heard. But that was the thing about places like this. Before they let you speak, they first decided if you were worth looking at. Lucia took a breath, straightened her posture, smoothed the front of her cardigan deep blue, buttoned to the collar, slightly faded at the elbows. And then she stepped forward. The security guard at the entrance didn't move, didn't nod, didn't even blink. Buenos dias, she offered. Softly, always the diplomat. Always starting in kindness. His eyes narrowed. This is a private meeting. Lucia paused. I'm here for the PTA gathering. The notice said room 201. He cocked his head slightly, then gave her the kind of slow glance that stripped people bare. From hair to shoes, he measured her and didn't like the sum. Are you staff? No, parent. He exhaled, clearly unimpressed. You have your name badge? I wasn't issued one yet. But IRSVPD. Lucia Alvarez. He leaned into the walkie clipped to his shoulder, mumbling something she couldn't quite hear. She waited. Behind her, SUVs continued to slide into the parking lot like well-groomed sharks. A blonde woman in a Patagonia vest stepped out with her child, barely glanced at Lucia, and said under her breath to her friend, the cleaning crew. Shouldn't be coming through this way, Lucia heard. Of course she did. You always hear it, no matter how polite the tone. But she didn't flinch. Ma'am, the guard said after a moment, I don't see your name. And this event is for PTA listed members only. I am listed. I sent the confirmation form last week, Lucia replied, voice still calm, though something inside her was tightening. You'll need to speak with someone from administration then. A pause. Can I go in and do that? He gestured to the bench by the flagpole. You can wait there. Someone might come out. Might. Lucia's eyes drifted to the glass doors behind him. Inside, she could see the backs of parents gathering in a hallway. Laughter, clipboards, coffee. Someone had brought cupcakes. There was a bright sign made by the 5th graders, Welcome PTA. Shaping our school together. The irony settled deep into her chest. She was the newly appointed chair of the school board, but they wouldn't even let her through the door. The wind picked up slightly, tugging gently at the hem of her cardigan. Lucia sat down on the bench like someone stepping into cold water slowly, without resistance, but fully aware of the chill. To her left, a child tripped coming down the curb. His juice box hit the pavement and burst. Sticky apple liquid spilled across the concrete. The mother swooped down not to comfort her son, but to yank him up by the collar and hiss, "Look what you've done. These shoes are new." "Lucia." leaned forward, pulling a napkin from her bag. The boy looked at her with wide eyes. She smiled, gently wiping the sugary mess from his hands. The mother glared at her, then muttered "gracias" like it was a dirty word, and dragged her son away without a second glance. Lucia didn't take it personally. She had seen that look before. It wasn't hate, exactly. It was a kind of invisible disgust, the kind people wear when they believe they're being generous by merely tolerating your existence. She looked back at the school's entrance. Still no one. The guard was now chatting with another parent, laughing about something. When he looked her way, there was a flicker of discomfort in his face, but he quickly masked it with a yawn. Lucia checked her phone. 9:04 a.m., 4 minutes past the official start time. Still, she waited. She had waited before. She had waited outside. Job interviews where the receptionist forgot she had an appointment. She had waited at Urs while her daughter burned with fever, only to be told, "You should have brought insurance." She had waited outside classrooms, back when she didn't know how to pronounce conference correctly, and teachers thought her silence meant ignorance. But the hardest waiting of all was the kind you did when you knew deep down they weren't forgetting you. They were ignoring you. 10 minutes passed. The breeze shifted. Her fingers grew cold, and she tucked her hands into the sleeves of her sweater. Across the lawn, a group of moms huddled under an umbrella, taking selfies in front of a PTA welcome banner. One of them tall, red-haired, wearing a Yale sweatshirt far too clean to be real, turned toward Lucia, squinted, then whispered something to the others. Laughter. Then the blonde one from earlier, narrow face, pearls, mascara still wet, walked toward her. "Excuse me," she said, with the kind of smile that always came before a slap. Lucia stood. "Yes?" The woman glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Are you looking for someone?" "I'm here for the PTA meeting." A beat, then a tight smile. "I see. I think the janitorial entrance is around the side." Lucia blinked. "I'm not staff," she said evenly. "I'm a parent." Another pause. Longer, heavier. The woman's eyebrows arched, like she didn't quite believe it, but was too polite to argue. "Well, we're trying to keep it organized in there. The chairs fill up fast. It's really just for the core committee." Lucie's voice didn't change. "IRSVPD, I'm on the list." The woman gave her one last up-down scan, then offered the smile again, this time thinner. "I'm sure someone will let you know if there's space." She walked away before Lucia could respond. Lucia didn't sit back down. She remained standing, spine straight, chin high. And still she didn't raise her voice. She didn't flash credentials. She didn't pull out the confirmation email from the district superintendent, the one that read in bold, "Welcome Chairwoman Alvarez. We're honored to have you." She just watched as mothers like her own once was tired, brown-skinned, unsure of their words, were shuffled into ESL corners and told their presence was appreciated but not needed. Watched as educators forgot names that weren't easy to pronounce, reducing children to statistics and skin tones. Watched as the PTA turned into a private club, where entry wasn't about participation, it was about presentation. And she remembered her first day in America. She was 16. Had stepped off the Greyhound bus with one duffel bag and her mother's rosary beads wrapped around her fingers. The sun in Texas was different, bolder, heavier, like it knew it wasn't welcome and insisted on staying anyway. Her first job had been cleaning classrooms, not attending them, and yet she'd learned. At night, she read second-hand textbooks under a flickering motel lamp. Her English came not from classes, but from cartoons and subtitles. She wrote essays on napkins, memorized vocabulary while folding laundry in silence, saved every penny to enroll in online courses, and then again to apply for scholarships when those ran out. She fell in love, got married, had a daughter, and then, Fire. Not just metaphor. Literal. An electrical short in the heating unit. Her husband died trying to get their baby out first. He succeeded. He died a hero. Lucia became a widow overnight, but she didn't collapse, didn't curse the world. She sued the school district for negligence and won, not for the money, for the precedent. For the change, she used that money to go back to school, to finish her degree, to become an educator, an advocate, a voice. And now, here she stood, on the other side of a gate. From inside, the sound of applause drifted through the glass like a ghost. A woman with a headset walked past the security gate, balancing a tray of name tags. She didn't even glance at Lucia as she breezed by, heels clicking against the tile. On the tray, Lucia caught a glimpse of the names carefully printed in bold font, each one attached to a pastel-colored lanyard. None said hers. She checked her phone again. 9:17 a.m., still no email, no text, no acknowledgement. Then, a voice quiet, hesitant. Senora Alvarez? Lucia turned. It was the janitor, young Latino, maybe early 20s. His uniform shirt bore the embroidered name Rico, and his sneakers looked too worn for his age. He held a mop handle like a walking stick and glanced nervously over his shoulder before stepping closer. I recognized you from the article. He offered a shy smile. You're the new school board chair, right? Lucia nodded. Rico shifted his weight. Why are you out here? She looked at him, really looked. There was no pity in her gaze, only recognition. Because sometimes, she said gently, even when you've earned your place at the table, people would rather pretend you're not hungry. His jaw tensed. He looked back toward the hallway, where laughter and chatter echoed louder now. That's messed up, he muttered. I could say something. I know Mrs. Weaver, she's in there, I could. Lucia touched his arm, stopping him. No, not yet. But you shouldn't be standing out here. That's not right. I've stood in worse places. Her voice wasn't bitter. It was matter of fact. The tone of someone who had once stood in line at immigration offices for 7 hours without water. Of someone who had once changed a baby's diaper in a public restroom stall while bleeding from a fresh key section. Rico's brow furrowed. If it were me, I'd knock the damn door down, Lucia smiled. That's the difference between us, Mio. You're young. I'm strategic. He didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. The doors to the auditorium opened. For a moment, Lucia thought someone had finally come to call her in. But it was just a wave of parents exiting for a coffee break. A catered table had been wheeled outside, organic muffins, pressed juices, gluten-free bagels stacked neatly in bamboo trays. Lucia stepped to the side as the crowd spilled out. 2 women brushed past her without apology. A man in a sport coat held a drink in each hand and didn't look up as he elbowed her slightly. Someone even sighed, annoyed, as if she were standing in the way of air. She heard a familiar voice. Among them, still waiting out here? It was the blonde again, the one with the smile like a paper cut. You know, next time you should try emailing ahead of time. The RSVP process is really important. Lucia said nothing. Anyway, the woman continued, gesturing to the crowd. We're just taking a quick break before the breakout sessions. I'm leading one on how to secure STEM internships for middle schoolers. It's never too early to plan for Harvard, right? She winked. Lucia raised an eyebrow. What about ESL tutoring? The woman paused. Her smile thinned. We don't really have a session for that, yet. Then she vanished into the crowd. Lucia stood alone again, but not unnoticed. Across the courtyard, someone was watching her. A small boy, maybe 10 years old, with thick glasses and a Spider-Man hoodie 2 sizes too big. He clutched a lunchbox to his chest like a shield. His skin was brown like hers. His eyes wide, curious. He waved. Lucia waved back. Inside the school, someone was running, Footsteps echoed across the linoleum floors. Then a voice, female, hurried, flustered, called out, "Wait! Wait!" A woman in a navy pantsuit appeared, cheeks flushed. Her ID badge flapped wildly against her blazer as she rushed through the front doors, waving an iPad above her head. "Ms. Alvarez, I'm so sorry, we didn't know you were here already." It was the assistant principal. Mid-30s, competent, but visibly nervous now. The RSVP list, it was forwarded late, and the admin assistant got stuck in traffic, and Lucia simply looked at her. No anger. No smile, just that steady, unnerving stillness. "I assure you," the woman continued, trying to keep her tone upbeat, "we're absolutely honored to have you. Everyone's so excited to meet you." Lucia tilted her head slightly. "Are they?" The woman flushed deeper. Yes, of course. Right this way. I'll escort you myself." Lucia didn't move, not right away, because now everyone was looking. The coffee drinkers, the muffin munchers, the yoga moms in their sneakers with tiny golden wings stitched into the sides, they were all turning to stare. Some had caught her name. Others just sensed a shift. The air changed. She stepped forward slowly. As she passed the security guard, she met his eyes. He looked away. Inside the hallway, every footstep echoed like a drumbeat. The assistant principal opened the double doors of the auditorium. The room hushed. Conversations died. Cups paused mid-air. Phones lowered. Lucia stepped in. Her face calm. Her shoulders relaxed. But her presence unmistakable. Someone dropped a pen. The blonde PTA leader stared, frozen mid-sentence, her face the color of curdled cream. Lucia looked around, then made her way to the front. No one spoke. No one dared. At the podium, the assistant principal fumbled with the mic, then cleared her throat. "Everyone. This is Ms. Lucia Alvarez, chairwoman of the district school board. She'll be leading today's keynote on equitable policy implementation." Lucia didn't thank her. She didn't nod. She stepped to the mic, adjusted it, and said, in a calm, clear voice, "Buenos dias, antes de que empecemos. Quiero cantarles algo." And with that, silence swept the room like a tide, a silence louder than applause, a silence that didn't beg for attention. It demanded respect. "Buenos dias, antes de que empecemos. Quiero cantarles algo. Good morning. Before we begin, I want to tell you something." Lucia's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the kind of voice that was used to being ignored, but not anymore. The kind of voice sharpened not by yelling, but by surviving. The kind that makes people shift in their seats, not out of boredom, but guilt. "Some of you already decided who I was the moment you saw me. You saw my cardigan, my skin, my silence. And you built a story." A few people stirred. One woman took off her sunglasses slowly. Another reached for her coffee but didn't sip. "You thought I was someone who shouldn't be here. You thought you could place me. You were wrong." She paused. "I was once a student in a classroom just like this school. My mother never came to parent meetings because she cleaned them. I used to sit in the back, afraid to raise my hand because I didn't know how to say 'excuse me' without an accent." Her gaze swept the room like a searchlight. "And yet here I am. Not because someone opened a door for me, but because I learned how to build my own." The mic hummed softly. No one breathed. Lucia stepped back, nodded once, and added simply, "Now let's begin." The applause didn't erupt. It unfolded slowly, hesitantly, like shame trying to turn into admiration. Like a room of people who weren't sure if they were clapping for her, or for themselves, for realizing they had been wrong. And yet, Lucia didn't wait for it to swell. She wasn't there for validation. She was there for reform. There's a silence that follows certain truths, an uncomfortable one. It's the kind that hovers, awkward and raw, after someone speaks the thing no one else dared to say aloud. That was the silence. Lucia left behind as she exited the auditorium to head toward the breakout session on parental equity in curriculum. Planning. She didn't need to turn around to feel the eyes on her back. Eyes that used to dismiss her now traced her every step with a strange mix of awe and unease, but not all of them had changed. Behind her, hushed voices stirred again. I mean, does she even have a degree from here? I heard she sued the district once. Can you believe that? She's got a chip on her shoulder, that's for sure. I mean, she didn't have to make it about race. Lucia walked past them, head high. She didn't need to dignify whispers. With answers in the hallway, she passed a tall white man in a Brooks Brothers blazer. He gave her a tight, professional nod, the kind that said, I acknowledge your position, but not your presence. She knew that nod. She had seen it in boardrooms, where men shook her hand like they were grabbing a dish rag. She had seen it. At fundraisers where donors asked her if she was helping cater. She had seen it when she took her daughter to the hospital and the nurse asked if she was the nanny. It was the nod of polite dismissal. In the breakout room, things weren't better. 5 women sat at the front table, all PTA leads from other schools. Their resumes were heavy with buzzwords. STEM forward, socio-emotional initiative, leadership pathways. Lucia noticed how 2 of them kept avoiding eye contact with her. One was scrolling her phone beneath the table. Another was fussing with her scarf like it was a shield. Let's begin with opening statements, the moderator chirped. Let's talk about parental involvement and how to promote consistent engagement across economic backgrounds. Lucia raised an eyebrow. Across economic backgrounds, she already knew how this would go. She listened as one woman proudly described a grant they used to give every student an iPad. But when asked about bilingual tech support, we haven't had much. Demand. Another woman spoke about fundraising. We made over $30,000 with our wine tasting gala, she said. Parents were so involved. Lucia glanced at the printed flyer on the table. The cheapest ticket had been $120. For some families, that was groceries for 2 weeks. Then came the microaggressions. So Lucia, can I call you Lucia? We're really excited to bring diverse voices to the table. I think what you're doing is so brave. I don't know how you balance it all. Brave, diverse. Balance. Code words. She smiled tightly. You mean how I manage a professional role, a child, and microaggressions? The room blinked. A silence. Then a forced laugh from one woman, too loud, too brittle. Lucia leaned forward slightly. Here's what I think. Parental engagement means it's not wine tastings. It's not Instagram shout-outs. It's making sure every parent, whether they speak English or not, knows they matter. That their presence isn't an inconvenience. That their children are. Not charity cases. One woman's lips twitched. Lucia continued, voice steady. You want more parental involvement? Start by opening the front door to parents who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who don't live on the same street or shop at the same Whole Foods. Another silence. Then someone asked, So, are you suggesting we've been excluding them? Lucia met her gaze. No, I'm saying you never invited them in the first place. The room didn't erupt in debate. It imploded into awkward glances. Woman in a cashmere poncho nervously recrossed her legs. Another adjusted her diamond-studded smartwatch, pretending to check the time. No one spoke for a solid 10 seconds, because nothing polite could be said without sounding like a confession. Then, from the back of the room, a voice broke the silence. I agree. Heads turned. It was a younger teacher. Black, mid-30s, wearing a sunflower print blouse and blue-framed glasses. Her name tag read Ms. Brianna Wells, literacy specialist. I've been saying this for years, she added, louder now. I've seen families pushed out without a single slur being said. Just rules. Just procedures and logistics that somehow always end up keeping the same people outside. The moderator tried to interrupt, but Brianna kept going. One time, a mom got turned away from a parent reading night because she brought homemade empanadas instead of store-bought snacks. They said it was a health code issue, you know. What the real issue was that she spoke Spanish and they didn't want a deal. Lucia glanced over and nodded once, not just in thanks, but in recognition. Ms. Wells wasn't defending her. She was defending the space Lucia represented. The tension in the room rippled now like a thread pulled too tight. A blonde PTA lead. At the front, a woman who hadn't spoken since Lucia walked in leaned in toward her colleague and whispered, "She's going to politicize everything." Lucia heard it. She always heard it. It was the same tone she heard when someone at a fundraiser once called her daughter ambitious for her background. The same voice that said, "We just want to keep the PTA neutral." The same people who could talk about wine, summer homes, and 5-digit school donations, but called it divisive when someone mentioned hunger or race. She turned toward the whisperer and said, without malice, "Talking about equity isn't political. It's reality. If it makes you uncomfortable, you might ask yourself why." That landed like a stone in still water. The room shifted again, not loudly, but visibly. Some lowered their eyes. One woman, clearly caught in her own reflexes, muttered, "I have black friends," under her breath, as if that was a shield. Lucia didn't flinch. She'd heard that line too many times. Suddenly, a new figure stepped into the room. A tall man, mid-50s, white hair, pressed slacks. Principal Gerald Kessler. His face was red, not from embarrassment, but from the panic of a man realizing he's several steps behind the narrative. He cleared his throat. "Chairwoman Alvarez. Apologies, I wasn't informed you had arrived. I meant to welcome you personally." Lucia offered a small smile, measured and razor-sharp. "I waited outside," she said. The words were simple, but the weight behind them? Tremendous. The principal nodded tightly. "Unfortunate miscommunication. It won't happen again." Lucia said nothing. He continued, "Perhaps we can break now and regroup for the curriculum workshop." "No," Lucia said, her voice gentle but unmovable. "Let's not break. Let's sit with this discomfort. This is where the real work begins." There it was again, that silence. Not the dismissive silence from earlier, but the charged kind. The kind that comes right before truth makes people change or run. Lucia stepped forward. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here because I believe in this district. I believe in every child who walks through those school doors, no matter what zip code they come from, what language they speak, or how old their shoes are." She paused, locking eyes with a few of the attendees who had whispered the loudest with their silences. "You say you want parents involved. You say you want community. But what you really want is control." No one denied it. No one dared. And until that changes, Lucia continued, no amount of muffins and gala nights will fix what's broken. Ms. Brianna Wells was the first to clap. Just once. A single, deliberate clap. Then again. And again. Others joined, some slowly, some with hesitation. But the sound grew not in volume, but in intention. It wasn't applause for a speaker. It was recognition of a mirror held up to a system that had gone unchecked for too long. As the session ended, the crowd slowly dispersed. But people weren't talking about iPads anymore. They weren't laughing about gala themes or organic wine. They were quiet, thoughtful. Lucinda stepped into the hallway and exhaled for the first time in over an hour. Ms. Wells joined her. "You okay?" Lucia smiled faintly. "I've been okay since the day they told me I couldn't." They stood in silence for a beat. Two women, two generations of the same fire. Then Brianna said, "You know, they're going to talk." Lucia replied, "Let them." And then she turned and walked straight into her past. Lucia didn't plan to walk into the lounge. Her feet did it for her. It was muscle memory. The kind that belonged not to the woman she had become, but to the girl she had once been. 16, scared, Invisible. The door creaked just the same scuffed linoleum. Same stale coffee smell. Same humming soda machine in the corner that always seemed louder than necessary. But the room felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because she had grown past it. She crossed the threshold, the way she used to at dawn, keys jangling at her hip, mop bucket in tow, praying no teacher would walk in early and see her humming lullabies in Spanish to herself as she worked. She stood still. The tile by the fridge was still cracked, the one she had slipped on one winter morning when the heater broke, and the condensation froze into a thin, treacherous layer. She had fallen so hard she couldn't breathe. But no one had seen. No one had asked. She just lay there, the cold biting her back, wondering if she'd ever be warm again. Back then, Lucia worked under a name that wasn't legally hers. Papers borrowed, identity borrowed. But the hunger, the labor, the dreams, they were hers, through and through. She walked to the far end of the room, to a spot beneath the corkboard where staff announcements were still pinned up, retirement potlucks, lost scarves, leftover birthday cake in the fridge. Lucia ran her fingers along the edge of the wall. The paint was newer now, but underneath it, she knew, were her fingerprints, her sweat, her silence. That day when she found the wallet, she had been cleaning late holiday break. The room was empty, quiet except for the rattle of old pipes. Under a chair leg, she spotted it, a sleek leather wallet, thick with cards and bills. It belonged to Mr. Kaufman, a social studies teacher who often lectured loudly about hard work and bootstraps. Lucia didn't hesitate. She returned it quietly, anonymously. Just left it on the front desk with a note. Found near lounge. Custodial staff. 2 days later, she overheard him telling another teacher. Probably one of the janitors took the cash. Damn lucky I got the rest back. She hadn't taken a dime, but she was the one who had scrubbed the floor beneath his desk. And now he couldn't even imagine someone like her could be honest. She closed her eyes, but memories opened instead. The time a secretary had locked the bathroom before Luce's shift was over because it needed to be kept clean. The time someone had eaten half her lunch from the shared fridge and left a note. Next time label it, cleaning lady. The time her hands bled from scrubbing rusted sink drains, and she couldn't afford gloves. But she remembered something else too. Her daughter, a toddler then, sleeping in a stroller beside her as she worked the evening shift. Lucia would sing to her in whispers, cleaning one-handed while rocking the stroller with the other. That child was now in 4th grade, and Lucia, once a shadow in this very lounge, was now shaping policies that would determine who got heard, who got fed, and who got left out. She walked to the window. The playground was visible through the foggy glass. A few children played tetherball under the watchful eye of a recess monitor. Lucia exhaled slowly, resting her palm on the window frame. And that's when she heard it. "Excuse me, Ms. Alvarez." She turned. A woman stood at the door. Tall. Ash blonde hair in a severe bun. Designer scarf. Pristine nails. She held a clipboard to her chest like a Bible. Lucia recognized her instantly. Catherine Weaver. Once the PTA vice chair, now the current president. But back when Lucia had been nothing but a mop and a name badge, Catherine had been the one who walked right past her every single day without ever once saying hello. They stood in silence for a moment. Catherine finally spoke, her tone careful. Too careful. "I didn't realize you'd be back here." Lucia tilted her head slightly. "And yet, here I am." Catherine offered a tight smile. "It's just that this room is normally reserved for staff." Lucia didn't move. "I suppose I've been part of the staff longer than you realize." There it was, that flash in Catherine's eyes. Recognition. Discomfort. memory tugging at the edges of privilege. You used to work here? Lucia nodded. I did. A pause. Then, almost reflexively, Catherine offered, I hope you know we appreciate everything our support staff does. Lucia smiled, soft but piercing. Do you? The room fell still again. I remember, Lucia said gently. When? Your son had strep throat. I found him in the hallway outside room 104, crying. No teacher nearby. I stayed with him for 20 minutes until someone noticed. He held my hand the whole time. Catherine blinked. I remember, Lucia added, when you asked the principal to remove the custodian's cart from the main hallway during events. You said it spoiled the aesthetic. That was my cart. Catherine looked like she had been slapped. I didn't. I mean, you didn't have to mean it, Lucia said, for it to hurt. Catherine didn't know what to say. That kind of silence, the kind that only shows up when someone realizes, maybe for the first time, that they were the villain. In someone else's story. She stood there, lips slightly parted, eyes clouded with something between confusion and guilt. Lucia remained still, calm, not triumphant, not cruel. Just steady. Then, without another word, Catherine nodded awkwardly and walked away faster than necessary. Lucia was alone again. But this time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like clarity. She closed her eyes, and memory came flooding. In that night, the small house they rented behind the old factory. Thin walls, creaky floors, the kind of place where winter came in even when the windows were closed. She was rocking her daughter to sleep when the lights flickered. A strange burning smell, then a soft pop followed by smoke. Louise! She'd shouted, but he was already at the stove. He ran in, grabbed their daughter before she could blink. No panic, just love in motion. He told Lucia to go now out the back window. She did. He did single quotes T. He went back for the documents, for the medicine, for the photos. He never made it out. Lucia had once believed that kind of grief would drown her, but at did single quotes D. It forced her to the surface. She sued the landlord. She sued the school district that ignored the dozens of reports about faulty wiring and staff housing. Nobody believed she'd win. An immigrant, a widow, no degree, broken English. They looked at her like a storm that wouldn't last. But she didn't stop. At first, all she wanted was an apology. Then she wanted to be heard. Then she wanted change. The case dragged for 14 months. She won. Not because they admitted guilt, but because they were afraid of what she'd do next. Settlement money was just enough to start over. A safer apartment, some savings, but most importantly, time. Time to learn. By day, she worked in a bakery. By night, she studied English using discarded school materials. When her daughters slept, she taught herself how to write scholarship essays. Each morning, she woke up at 5 to scrub a classroom, and dreamed of one day standing at the front of it. The first person to believe in her was a black teacher named Miss Franklin. Every morning, the woman greeted Lucia with a smile, a real one. One day, she asked, "Have you ever thought about becoming a teacher?" Lucia had laughed, shaking her head. Me? I just mopped the floors. Miss Franklin rested a hand on her shoulder. No one's born a teacher. But if you know how to listen, really listen, you might be the best kind we've ever had. Miss Franklin died 3 years later from cancer. Lucia carried her words like a small fire. She fed that fire every time someone looked down on her. Every time a PTA mom raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you even have the qualifications to decide what's best for our kids?" Every time a principal smiled tightly and said, "Well, parents like you might not understand how grant funding works." Every time a young Latina girl sat in the back of a classroom, afraid to speak because her accent wasn't polished. Lucia saw herself, but she didn't cry. She organized. Then came the call. 3 months ago, an email from the State Department of Education. They were looking for a board chair who had lived the struggles, not just studied them. someone who understood what it meant to be left out and had fought their way back in. Lucia applied. No one thought she'd be chosen. She wasn't just chosen, she was unanimously appointed chairwoman. The confirmation letter was signed by the very same official who had once testified against her in a funding hearing. Now, he was a senior advisor with no authority to stop her appointment. She didn't cry when the email came. She looked in the mirror, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered, "We're still here." There was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant, almost polite. Lucia turned, half expecting to see another PTA lead coming to apologize her posture. But instead, a student stood there, a girl, maybe 15, wearing an oversized sweatshirt with the school logo and a shy, unsure smile. Her skin was light brown, her black curls tied up in a loose bun. Around her neck hung a bronze medal that caught the light like a secret. Lucia smiled. "Hi there." The girl stepped inside slowly. "They told me you'd be in here. I just wanted to meet you." Lucia tilted her head, inviting the girl to sit. "What's your name?" "Isabella. Isabella Ruiz. I'm getting an award today." "For academic achievement," Lucia nodded. "Congratulations, Isabella. That's a beautiful medal." The girl touched it nervously. "Thanks. My mom made me come say thank you." She said, "That woman. She's the reason you're still in school." Lucia's smile softened. She wasn't surprised, but she let the girl talk. "My mom said, you helped us when I was little." "I don't remember, but she does. We were getting evicted. She didn't speak English very well, and she couldn't understand the court papers. You were the janitor back then, I guess. But somehow you helped her find someone from legal aid," she said. "You even walked with her to the bus stop afterward. She was crying. And you said not to let anyone make her feel small for asking for help." Lucia's chest ached, not from sadness, but from the strange warmth that memory can bring when it returns wearing new clothes. "I remember," Lucia said. "She remembers everything," Isabella said. "And when she heard your name on the announcement last week, when they said you were the new chairwoman, she cried again. But this time, it wasn't because she was scared. She said, 'Mia, someone finally made it. One of us.'" Lucia had nothing to say, because sometimes silence is the only thin wide, enough to hold the weight of full circle moments. Isabella stood up, still fiddling with her medal. "I'm nervous about speaking in front of the whole auditorium. But if you're there, I'll be okay." Lucia rose from her chair. She placed a hand gently on Isabella's shoulder and said, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be real. That's more than enough." The girl nodded, eyes wide. Then with one last smile, she turned and walked out. Lucia remained behind just for a minute longer. She looked around the staff lounge, this forgotten corner where she once changed trash bags, wiped coffee spills, cleaned up behind people who never bothered to remember her name. And now, she had become the reason a child like Isabella would walk on stage feeling seen. She stepped out into the hallway, where the air felt sharper. From down the corridor, she saw the principal again, Mr. Kessler, flanked by a camera crew. A local news station was setting up for the student awards ceremony. Chairwoman Alvarez. He called, waving her over with a microphone in hand. She joined them, smiled for the camera, took the expected photo, shook hands. The lights flashed, but she wasn't thinking about the lights. She was thinking about all the people in the audience who would sit there today, clapping for children of color, smiling for the camera, without ever reckoning with the biases still alive in the walls they walked past daily. And she knew. They hadn't seen the twist yet. They hadn't realized the child they were about to honor was standing on the shoulders of someone they once refused to let in through the front door. Later that afternoon, as Lucia sat on stage during the student awards, Isabella's name was called. The applause was warm. A few people even stood. Lucia watched the girl walk up, trembling but upright, holding her speech like it might fly away if she let go. And when Isabella reached the microphone, she cleared her throat and said, "I just want to thank my mom. And I want to thank someone who helped her when no one else did. I don't remember it, but she does, and now I do too." She turned slightly, looked directly at Lucia. "I'm here because someone chose to care when they didn't have to. I think that's what real leadership is." The room stilled. Lucia didn't smile. She let a single tear fall and didn't wipe it away. The ceremony wrapped up with polite applause and a photo session staged with uncomfortable enthusiasm. Teachers posed with students they barely knew. Board members exchanged tight smiles. The news crew packed up, satisfied with their 3-second B-roll of diversity. Lucia stayed a little longer. She didn't rush to leave. Sometimes power doesn't arrive with a bang. It settles quietly in how long you can stand still in the places they once tried to push you out of. She was finishing her coffee near the entrance when a voice called her name, a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Ms. Alvarez?" She turned slowly. It was Edith Campbell, older now, still imposing, back straight, hair gray at the roots, but pulled into the same rigid bun she'd worn since Lucia was mopping floors outside her office. Back then, Edith had been vice principal, the gatekeeper of policy, the one who denied Lucia's application to become a teacher's aide, citing language proficiency concerns. Despite the fact Lucia had already passed the certification exam, "You'll be a distraction," Edith had said flatly. "It might confuse the students. They need role models who fit the system, not challenge it." Lucia had nodded at the time and walked away, but she had never forgotten. Now, Edith approached with a smile too wide, too white, too late. "I'm so glad we could catch up," she said, voice syrupy. "I've been following your journey. Truly inspirational." Lucia waited. Because the compliment always came before the ask. Edith didn't waste time. "My granddaughter Ava, she's transferring into the district next year. Gifted, incredibly bright. We're hoping she can land a spot in the STEM advancement program. But they've changed the requirements this year, and, well, you know how competitive it's gotten." Lucia said nothing. "I was wondering," Edith continued, still smiling, "if perhaps there's something you could do. A letter of recommendation? A conversation with the program director? I mean, who better to advocate than the chairwoman herself?" There it was, the full circle. The woman who once told Lucia she didn't belong in front of a classroom now wanted Lucia to open doors for her granddaughter. Lucia inhaled softly, held it, released it. She didn't gloat, she didn't mock. Instead, she said, "Ava sounds like a lovely girl. I'd be happy to review her application through the same equity-focused process we've implemented for all families, fairly, transparently, without shortcuts." Edith's smile faltered. "But of course," Lucia added, "you've always supported clear policy, haven't you?" Edith nodded, tightly, like swallowing a pill too big. "Of course," she muttered. Lucia let her walk away, not with cruelty, but with clarity, because forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant letting someone leave with the weight of their own choices and not picking it up for them. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the sidewalks in gold. Kids darted across the lawn, laughter echoing through the courtyard. A janitor wheeled out a trash bin, humming an old ranchera song. Lucia stood by the flagpole, once a place where she was told to wait. Now, no one could keep her waiting again. She touched the bronze pin on her blazer, the one they'd given her when she was sworn in. She didn't wear it often. It wasn't for show, but today, it meant something. Behind her, the front doors swung open. A new group of parents arrived, some in work boots, some holding children, some speaking Spanish. No one stopped them. Lucia turned and smiled. The system hadn't changed overnight, but it had cracked, and light was getting through. By the next PTA mixer, Lucia's presence had become a legend. Nobody said anything directly, but everybody performed. The moment she walked into the community hall, wearing the same clean, calm cardigan she always wore, every head turned like it was rehearsed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Lattes were lowered. Eyebrows lifted with curated enthusiasm. "Oh, my God, Ms. Alvarez. So glad you could make it," one mom beamed, gripping a tray of gluten-free brownies with the desperation of a peace offering. Another chimed in. "Way too loud. She's the reason our school is thriving. Honestly, we should put her face on the mural." Lucia raised an eyebrow. That same mural, ironically, had featured all white historical figures and 0 women. Until last semester, when Lucia quietly rewrote the art policy. She offered a polite smile. "I'd settle for a working elevator and a translated lunch menu." Someone laughed too loud, too forced. "Oh, you're funny." Lucia just sipped her coffee. It tasted like overcompensation. At the community circle icebreaker, parents were invited to share fun facts about their families. A mom stood up and said proudly, "Well, our daughter just started fencing lessons. Her coach competed at the Paris Olympics." The room nodded, appropriately impressed. Then a dad added, "Our son is learning Mandarin. We're planning immersion in Shanghai next summer. You know, global citizens." Lucia watched the self-congratulations swell like a wave. When it was her turn, she stood calmly. "My daughter taught me how to use Google Docs last year. I guess we're finally catching up on 21st century skills." The room froze. One dad snorted, then clapped, then caught himself. Lucia smiled. She didn't need applause. She needed them to squirm, just a little. The most awkward moment, however, came during the Q&A. PTA board member, thin, twitchy, the type who always carried 5 pens and still asked to borrow one, raised his hand and cleared his throat. "So Chairwoman Alvarez," he said nervously, "I was wondering if you'd consider creating a subcommittee on cultural sensitivities. Just, so we can be proactive in understanding each other better." Lucia tilted her head. "What did you have in mind?" He panicked. I mean, like, maybe an event where we all bring food from our culture? Like potluck for social justice?" Someone behind him coughed. Lucia nodded slowly. "So, tacos for equity?" He blinked. No, I didn't mean it like." Lucia let him dangle for a second longer than was comfortable. Then, with a grin that could slice granite, she said, "Sounds fun. But let's make sure everyone gets to bring a seat to the table, not just the enchiladas." The room cracked up nervous laughter, the kind that says we're laughing because we're not sure what else to do. But nothing topped what happened next. Little boy, probably 2nd grade, wandered up to Lucia while she was standing near the sign-in table. He stared at her, chewing on a string from his hoodie. "You're the boss lady, right?" Lucia kneeled slightly. "Depends who you ask." The boy thought a second. "Are you the reason my mom keeps saying, we gotta act right now every time we come here?" Lucia blinked. "Maybe." He nodded solemnly. "She hides her wine when you walk by." Lucia laughed so hard, she had to step outside to breathe. Later, as she stood on the patio, looking up at the school's rooftop where pigeons gathered like nosy reporters, Lucia exhaled. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't retribution. It was just balance. The kind of poetic symmetry that life rarely affords, but when it does, it comes wrapped in awkward silences, recycled enthusiasm, and nervous cookies labeled inclusive. And the best part? She didn't have to say a word, she just had to keep showing up. And watching the room rearrange itself around the space. She no longer had to ask for. The building was quiet. Not school quiet, not meeting quiet. But after everything quiet, Lucia sat alone on the edge of the stage in the empty auditorium. Her cardigan lay folded beside her. The air had that end-of-day stillness, the kind that hums inside your chest, not your ears. There were no cameras now. No applause. No questions. No compliments. No parents asking how to support diversity. Without getting too political. Just her. Just silence. And sometimes, that was the loudest company of all. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, folded at the corners, creased in the middle. Her husband Lise was smiling in the sunlight, holding their daughter, maybe 2 years old at the time. He wore a shirt with one missing button and a watch he never stopped checking. When Lucia was late from her second shift, he used to say, "I didn't marry a woman. I married a whole revolution with tired feet." She used to laugh. Now, she blinked the tears back, the kind that didn't fall easily anymore. They lived in her bones now, in her knuckles, in her tired shoulders, and the way she always stood up straighter. When people looked at her too long, that night came back like it always did. The night after the fire. It wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic thunderstorm, no police tape, no fire captain offering comforting words. There was only a cot. And a church. She sat on it, knees to her chest, still covered in soot. Her daughter slept beside her on a pile of donated blankets. Lucia didn't sleep. She didn't cry, either. She sat still, terrifyingly still, and tried to remember what it felt like to breathe without guilt. But all she could hear was the echo of her last words to Luis. "Just get the papers. We'll need the papers." As if papers could replace a man. As if forms and documents and court-stamped folders could fill a crib that would now always feel too big. That night, her body shook. Not from the cold, but from something deeper. The kind of shaking that happens when your life has been picked clean, and all that's left is you and the terrifying question of whether you was enough. She wanted to scream, but her daughter shifted. In her sleep, clutching her tiny blanket. So Lucia swallowed the scream, pressed it down, buried it where women like her always buried things. In silence. In strength. In the cracks between what they lost and what they had no choice but to build next. The weeks that followed were a blur. Charities, shelter, denials, applications, rejections. Lucia learned how to lie with a smile, how to say, "We're okay," when she hadn't eaten in 2 days. How to show up to job interviews without mentioning she hadn't had a shower that morning. How to hold her daughter with one arm while filling out government forms with the other. And at night, after her daughter was asleep, she would lie on the floor beside the cot and whisper to the ceiling, "Don't let me break." Not because she believed someone was listening, but because she needed to hear herself promise. She remembered one night in particular. It was raining. Not hard, just steady. The sound of it on the church roof was almost soothing. She sat in hallway outside the sleeping area, staring at the soda machine like it might dispense hope instead of sugar. Volunteer came by, young, maybe 20, blonde, nice enough face. He knelt beside her and whispered, "You don't have to do this alone." She looked at him and realized he meant it. But what he didn't realize was that being alone wasn't the hardest part. Staying whole was, and you didn't get to stay whole by depending on anyone who had the luxury of walking away. So she said, "Thank you," and then went back to the cot, because kindness doesn't always come from safety. Sometimes it comes from people who have no idea what you've already survived, just to stand up that day. Back in the auditorium, Lucia held the photo of Luis tighter. "I haven't forgotten you," she whispered. "I just got louder." She looked up at the empty chairs in front of her, each one filled, in her imagination, with the faces of women who'd never been invited to speak. Mothers, teachers, janitors, bus drivers, widows. She could feel them now. Not watching, but standing. Behind her, the sun had dipped below the city line by the time Lucia reached the tiny cafe tucked between a laundromat and a check-cashing shop. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped in, soft, almost reluctant, like it remembered her. She saw him immediately. Same seat. Same coffee. Same posture, but older now. His name was Jonas Patel, a public defender back then, long before the state started outsourcing legal aid to firms who only cared if the case came with headlines. He had represented her family, not officially, not for pay, just because he couldn't sleep after reading her file. Lucia sat across from him without a word, no handshake, no formalities, just old familiarity. Jonas looked up and smiled. "I thought you might forget. I don't forget people who show up when no one else does." He nodded. "Still can't believe they made you chair." She shrugged. "They didn't make me. They just stopped getting in the way." That made him laugh, an honest, tired laugh. The kind that belongs to people who fought too many uphill battles to pretend they're impressed anymore. They talk. Not about politics. Not about the board. Just about people. "How's your daughter?" he asked, too smart for her own. "Good, learning how to argue. You'd be proud." "I already am." Lucia sipped her tea. "How'd you end up in this part of town again?" He gestured around the cafe. "They shut down the clinic I worked for. Budget cuts. I opened a private practice, nothing fancy. Just enough to stay angry at the system in peace." She smiled at that. Then silence. Then the question that had been waiting like a ghost in the corner. "Do you think justice actually works?" she asked. Jonas looked at her. Long. Slow. "I think it can make you whole enough to walk," he said. "But not enough to forget why you fell." Lucia nodded. "That's what I thought." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small envelope. It had been sealed for years. "I wrote this the night after Louise died," she said. "I never gave it to anyone, not even the judge, not even myself." Jonas hesitated. "You sure you want me to?" "No," she said. "I want me to." She opened it. And read, "To whomever believes we don't belong." Her voice cracked just once. Then she continued, "We don't want your pity. We don't need your sympathy. But we deserve your eyes, your ears, your space. We are not what you built this system for, but we are here, and we are not asking anymore. We are becoming." When she finished, Jonas said nothing. He just reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was sacred. Later that night, Lucia walked home beneath a sky that looked like it had been painted by someone who understood grief, dark, layered, and endlessly open. She passed a group of girls practicing step routines in the park. A man in a hoodie handed out flyers about eviction rights near the bus stop. Mother juggled 2 crying babies and 3 bags of groceries with quiet grace. These weren't headlines. These were her people. This was her world. And she had fought like hell to earn the right to hold it in her arms without apology. Back in her apartment, her daughter was asleep. Lucia crawled into bed beside her and stared at the ceiling. She thought of Louise. Of Miss Franklin, of the janitor who once said, "Knock the damn door down." And then finally, she let the tears come, not out of sadness. But release. Because survival had taught her how to build walls. But love? Love had taught her it was okay to rest behind them. The lights in the conference hall were bright, too bright, but Lucia had long since learned not to blink when the spotlight hit. The banner behind her read, "Education and Equity, building the table, not just sitting at it." She was the keynote speaker. She stood before a sea of educators, administrators, policymakers. Some took notes. Some stared. Some, she could tell, were waiting for the kind of speech that could be quoted and forgotten in the same news cycle. She didn't give them that. She gave them truth. "I used to think justice was a door," she said. "And all I had to do was knock loud enough." The room quieted. "But the thing about doors," she continued, "is that they were built by someone. Measured, designed, with locks." She paused. "So I stopped knocking." A few people shifted in their seats. "I've never told this story in public," she said. "But I think today is the day." She inhaled slowly. And spoke. "I lost my husband in a fire, an electrical fire. caused by faulty wiring in staff housing for temporary school employees. The reports about that building's condition were ignored. We were seen as disposable, just help, just names on shift rosters. She looked out into the room. No one moved. I told him to go back in and get the papers, insurance documents. I thought we'll need them. I thought bureaucracy was the enemy. A beat. I was wrong. She blinked, but her voice never shook. The enemy was silence. The kind that pretends it doesn't hear crying mothers. That edits out stories like mine from every district success report. Lucia stepped away from the podium, walked slowly across the stage. Her heels echoed with every step. My husband died proving he was worthy of being seen. I'm here to make sure no one else has to. The silence wasn't just quiet now. It was reverent. A woman in the third row wiped a tear. A man in the back slowly closed his laptop. Lucia continued, "You don't have to lose everything to understand justice. But sometimes the ones who've lost the most are the only ones brave enough to speak." She smiled, but not the practiced political smile, a real one. And we're not just speaking, we're staying. The applause didn't come all at once. It came in waves. First from the back, then the sides, then the center. Then a full standing ovation like thunder breaking over a hard, unyielding system that had finally cracked. Afterward, people lined up to shake her hand. Some hugged her, some couldn't look her in the eye. But she stood there, still, like the roots of a tree that had survived fire, flood, and years of people trying to chop it down. She didn't need their praise. She had reclaimed her story. And now, it was no longer just hers. It began with a folder. Nothing more. Just a manila folder held tightly in the hands of an older gentleman in a gray suit with tired eyes and polished shoes. He walked into the post-conference media session like he belonged there, because in a way, he always had. His name was Harold Levinson, retired assistant superintendent, once revered, now mostly forgotten. He waited until the last camera turned off, until the last handshake had been exchanged, until Lucia stepped off the platform with a cup of stale coffee in her hand and her blazer slung over one arm. Then he approached her, not like a friend, not like an enemy, like someone who had come to surrender something heavier than guilt, the truth. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, "I believe I owe you a conversation, and something else." She didn't recognize him at first, but his voice, that rasp, worn down by years of policy debates and carefully phrased denials, jogged something in her spine. She had once sat across from him in a deposition room, asking why no one responded to her husband's work order requests. Back then, he'd shrugged, claimed no knowledge, claimed the forms were missing. Now he held the forms. All of them. "These were never lost," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "They were buried, on purpose. I didn't do it alone, but I didn't stop it either." Lucia didn't take the folder right away. She stared at it, as if touching it might confirm everything she had always suspected and feared was true. "Why now?" she asked. Harold exhaled. "Because I was sitting in that crowd, listening to you speak, and I realized the room's changed. But I haven't, not really. And that's not justice. That's just cowardice with a pension." He handed her the folder and walked away. No explanation. No offer to stay. Just a man leaving behind the weight of what he didn't say when it still mattered. Lucia opened it that night, and what she found nearly brought her to her knees. The work order requests her husband had filed were stamped, received, signed off 3 weeks before the fire. The inspection reports marked urgent. The internal memo suggesting it would cost more to fix than to settle quietly if it ever became litigious. The initials at the bottom of that memo were from the then head of maintenance and the current district budget chair. She didn't sleep that night. She just sat in the kitchen with the folder on the table and the weight of 1,000 vindications. That felt nothing like victory, The next morning, at the school board meeting, she didn't begin with pleasantries. She didn't wait for the agenda. She stood, held up the folder and said, "This was hidden. By this institution. From me. From you. From every person who trusted this district to care more about people than money." The room froze. Phones were slowly raised. Whispers moved like electricity. She read aloud from the memo. She named names. She said dates, said them like bullets, said them like wounds. When she finished, no one clapped, no one moved. Even those who had dismissed her. Before now sat pale and silent, watching a woman they had tried to overlook turn a meeting into a reckoning. And then came the second blow. A mother in the back, quiet, young Afro-Latina, stood up and said, "I was told my daughter couldn't receive a scholarship because her last name wasn't appropriate for alumni fundraising. That's what the counselor told me." She wrote it down by accident on the copy she gave me. She held up the paper, gasps, then a rustle. Then someone dropped a pen and it echoed like thunder. One of the assistant principals tried to interject, but Lucia cut through. "You don't get to explain this away, not anymore." But the twist that shattered everything came next. Because someone else raised their hand. Slowly, an older white man. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since the start of the meeting. His name, Donald Lively, current interim superintendent. Former legal counsel of the district. He cleared his throat, stood, and said the sentence no one expected. "I never told anyone this. I never connected the names, but I owe you something too." He turned to Lucia. "Your husband, Luis Alvarez. He once carried my daughter out of that same building. During a smaller fire 6 months before. He was off duty. He didn't even report it, he just did it." Lucia's hand tightened around the table edge. "What are you saying?" Donald looked down. "I'm saying I've spent the last 6 years advocating for budget cuts that made people like him invisible. And now I know he saved my family. And I did nothing to protect his." Silence again. Not noble, not cleansing, just broken. People cried. Some tried to speak and couldn't. Some stood, only to sit back down, unable to bear the weight of what it meant to be complicit by convenience. Lucia didn't yell. Didn't gloat. She simply said, "This isn't about revenge. This is about recognition, and accountability, and repair." Her voice held steady. "The difference between those who survive and those who thrive is simple. Survivors carry the truth in silence. But the ones who thrive, they say it out loud." She set the folder down in the middle of the table like a stone. "So here it is, out loud." The board voted unanimously that day to declassify all past internal housing records, to launch an independent audit, to remove 3 members immediately and begin recall petitions. It was the kind of motion that once would have been drowned in bureaucracy. Now it moved like a freight train. The crowd didn't cheer. But when Lucia walked out of that room, no one looked away. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust toward her like weapons and olive branches. "How does it feel to finally be heard?" one asked. Lucia thought for a second, then answered, "I'm not here to be heard. I'm here to make sure the next woman doesn't have to fight this hard just to speak." She didn't smile. She didn't pose. She just walked away. And the crowd moved around her, not to block her, but to follow. The board meeting had ended, but the aftershocks were only beginning. That evening, emails began to surface forwarded by anonymous staff, leaked from dusty inboxes, downloaded from hard drives no one had bothered to encrypt. Memos timestamped during holiday weekends. Internal notes where staff discussed parent appearance quotas for promotional videos. Even a suggested script for staff to politely redirect immigrant parents to alternative meeting times to manage optics. It was all there. Names, dates, language that danced around legality like it was a game. Lucia sat in her car outside her daughter's school as the files kept arriving in her inbox. One message from a teacher read, "I've been holding this in for years. Thank you for giving us a reason to finally speak." Another, "We weren't." All silent because we didn't care. Some of us were surviving too. And then came a message she couldn't ignore. From a name she hadn't seen in nearly a decade, Amelia Carrington. It read, "You don't know me, but I remember you. You saved my life. I want to tell you something about that night. Please call me." Lucia didn't recognize the name at first, but when she looked it up her heart skipped. Amelia had been one of the children in the building the night it burned. One of the names listed on the resident roll. A child of the then facilities director who had resigned quietly a year after the fire and moved out of state. Lucia called. Amelia answered on the first ring. Her voice was grown, but the tremble in it hadn't changed. "I was 10, she said, and I remember hiding under the kitchen table. I couldn't breathe, but I remember a woman with a red scarf and a bleeding hand breaking the window to get to me. That was you, wasn't it?" Lucia couldn't speak. Amelia continued, "They told me it was a firefighter. But I saw your eyes. You stayed with me. You told me to close my eyes and count in Spanish until the smoke went away. I still count like that when I panic." Lucia whispered, "I didn't." "No, you remembered. I never forgot," Amelia said. "And I think it's time people knew." The next day, Amelia came forward publicly. She stood beside Lucia at a press conference and told the story in front of flashing cameras. She described the red scarf, the soft Spanish, the bloodied hand, the woman no one ever named, the woman no one ever thanked, but who had crawled through broken glass to pull her out of a burning room when no one else could reach her. Her father, the former director, resigned from his new position in shame within hours of the press release. He issued a brief statement. "I was afraid of what the truth would do to my family. Now I realize it was already saving us," the district scrambled. Policies were rewritten overnight. A task force was formed with Lucia at the helm not because she asked, but because no one else had the credibility to lead. More parents came forward. Stories poured out from mouths long silenced by fear and fatigue. Custodial staff who had been passed over for benefits. Teaching assistants reprimanded for speaking Spanish to students during lunch. Parents who were told their advocacy might be better received if someone else presented the proposal. It wasn't just about fire, codes and budget memos anymore. It was about culture. About what happens when an entire system is built to applaud diversity in photos, but punish it in practice. Lucia found herself invited onto national panels, podcasts, interviews. But she only said yes to one, a taped town hall at her daughter's school, live audience. No script, just Lucia in a simple chair, facing a room of parents and students. The moderator asked, "What do you want people to take from all this?" Lucia took a breath. That justice doesn't begin with anger. It begins with memory, with refusing to let someone else write your story for you. The crowd was quiet. She continued, "You don't get to bury truth just because it makes you uncomfortable. And you don't get to silence people just because they speak with an accent. The fire that killed my husband didn't end that night. It smoldered, in culture, in the daily ways we make people feel small. I'm here to tell you we're done shrinking." She stood, not for applause, but because she was finished, and for the first time, the system didn't try to speak over her. It listened. The official apology came quietly. A press release buried on the district's website at 4:57 p.m. on a Friday. But Lucia didn't need the headline. She already knew what was coming. And this time, she didn't wait for the world to write it for her. She called for a town gathering, not a press event, not a board meeting, just a space. An open gym, folding chairs. No microphones, no title cards. Just people, students, parents, teachers, grandmothers, janitors, daughters, She stood in front of them in jeans and a white shirt, nothing fancy, nothing that made her look untouchable. "I'm not here to be honored," she said. "I'm here because some things belong to all of us, and truth is one of them." She didn't speak long. She didn't have to. Because then, a student stepped forward. Her name was Araceli. 10 years old, brown-skinned, nervous but bright-eyed. She held a drawing in her hand, a crayon sketch of Lucia with fire behind her, and a little girl holding her hand. At the bottom, it read in messy but proud letters, "She didn't run away. She came back." Araceli walked up to Lucia and hugged her waist tightly. "I want to be like you," she said. "But I don't want to wait till I'm big." Lucia kneeled down. "You don't have to wait," she said. "You already are." That moment didn't make the newspapers. But it lived. It lived in the way the room changed after. In the way people spoke softer, but listened harder. In the way the janitor was offered a seat at the staff circle for the first time. In the way ESL students were invited to lead the next assembly. In the way the doors stayed open literally, physically during the next board meeting. No more buzzers. No more benches outside. Lucia didn't rebuild the system. She cracked it open. And what came pouring out wasn't just shame. It was possibility. Possibility shaped like children who wouldn't have to carry their parents' silence anymore. Possibility wrapped in the voice of a girl who didn't need permission to lead. Possibility that spoke Spanish, English, Spanglish, and sometimes just the language of presence. And as Lucia walked home that night, hand in hand with her daughter, who asked if they could stop for ice cream, she didn't think of revenge. She didn't think of vindication. She just thought, we're not invisible anymore. And that, finally, was enough. It started with one voice, then a dozen, then 100. At the next school board meeting, held not in the usual sterile conference room, but in the high school gym because of the overwhelming turnout, Lucia arrived to find something she'd never seen before. A line, not for registration, not for coffee, but for the microphone. Parents, teachers, students, custodians, librarians, crossing guards, lunch workers, they all had something to say, and this time, no one told them to sit down. The first speaker was a 6th grade teacher who'd been working in silence for 2 decades. "I was told to stop using bilingual books. I regret listening." The next was a grandfather who raised 2 kids in the district and was now raising a 3rd. "I used to believe showing up wasn't worth it. But watching Ms. Alvarez fight now, I know silence is more expensive." Then came a mother from a trailer, parked 2 zip codes away. "I didn't know what equity meant until I saw what it looks like. It looks like being let through the front door without apologizing." And then came the lawyer. Her name was Maya Cho, young Korean American, fast mind, fierce voice. Barely out of law school, already a sharp edge in a dull room. She stood tall at the mic with her badge still pinned to her jacket from the local civil rights coalition. She didn't smile. She read from a folder. "The district is in violation of Section 601 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, she began. "We are filing a class action suit for discriminatory access, procedural suppression, and cultural targeting." The room held its breath. Lucia closed her eyes for a moment, not from fear. From relief. She was no longer the only one carrying the weight. Maya looked directly at the superintendent. "If you want to know who's behind this lawsuit, look around. It's the people who built your school while being told not to sit in the front row." Applause broke out, raw, loud, unapologetic. Then, a moment no one saw coming. The mayor of the city, once notoriously absent at school functions, walked in. Unannounced. No motorcade. No press release. He took the stage and said simply, "I came here to speak. I'm leaving here to listen." Lucia raised her eyebrows. Everyone did. He cleared his throat. "My mother was a cafeteria worker in this district. I never told anyone that growing up. I was embarrassed. Now, I see her in every one of you." He turned toward Lucia. "You've built what politics never could. A community not afraid to name itself." The media flooded the gym the next day. National news, local stations, podcasts, live streams, subtitles in 3 languages, but none of that mattered as much as what happened at the end of the meeting. A resolution passed. Unanimous. All policies regarding community access, board representation, and language inclusion would be restructured by a diverse committee, including parents from underserved backgrounds. Appointed directly by public nomination, Lucia didn't speak that night. She didn't have to. The people were speaking for her now. As the crowd filed out, a young girl in braids and sneakers stopped by Lucia's chair. She held out a paper bracelet. "I made it in art class," she said shyly. "It says, 'Forever Chairwoman.' My teacher says that's not a real job, but I think it is." Lucia bent down and took the bracelet like it was made of gold. "It's the most real job I've ever had," she whispered. That night, her inbox overflowed. Messages from cities across the country. From single moms, from janitors, from first-generation students, from men who never finished school but taught their kids to read, from people who never thought the system could see them, and now knew it couldn't unsee them again. A father in Arizona wrote, "I never went to my daughter's school events because I didn't think I belonged. But tonight, I held her hand and walked through the front door. Thank you for that." Lucia read every message, then closed her laptop and cried. But this time, not from grief. From release. Months passed. The media faded. The hashtags slowed. The article stopped trending. But the changes didn't. At Jefferson Elementary, hallway murals began to include faces that weren't just historical, they were familiar. The cafeteria offered tamales next to meatloaf. Announcements were posted in 3 languages. And the janitor's break room, now called the community room, with couches donated by parents who once didn't know that room existed. Lucia had declined a second term as chair. The room gasped when she announced it, but she smiled gently and said, "True power is knowing when to leave the door open and when to walk through it so someone else can sit." They had offered to name the library after her. She said no. Instead, she proposed it be named after Miss Franklin, the teacher who first saw her. That name now hangs above the entrance in silver lettering, the Franklin Center for Learning and Belonging. Lucia didn't want a statue, she wanted seeds. 1 year later, a new chair was sworn in, Brianna Wells, the teacher who once stood up in a breakout session when no one else would. Now flanked by 2 young mothers, one Vietnamese, one Haitian. As co-chairs, Lucia stood in the back of the crowd that day. No podium. No announcement. Just her, watching. And smiling, because now, the chair didn't belong to one woman. It belonged to a movement. After the ceremony, Lucia walked home with her daughter. The girl, now 11, had drawn a poster in class that read, "Justice means my mom got let in, but power means she let others in too." They stopped at the corner store. Got ice cream, mint chocolate chip for her daughter, coconut for Lucia. Outside, a young mother with a baby on her hip looked up and paused. She recognized Lucia. Her eyes widened, but Lucia shook her head and smiled kindly. "You don't have to thank me," she said. The woman nodded, then whispered, "I won't forget you." Lucia placed her hand over her heart. "Just remember yourself," and kept walking. In the years to come, no single act would define Lucia Alvarez, not a speech, not a lawsuit, not even a title. But if you asked any child who sat in a classroom where their name was finally pronounced correctly, any parent who attended a meeting without being told they didn't belong, any teacher who no longer had to choose their battles to do the right thing, they'd all say the same thing: she didn't kick the door down. She made sure it never closed again. She didn't shout. She didn't slam doors. She didn't demand a crown. She walked back in through the same door they once closed on her, so she could hold it open for the next girl. And maybe that's what real leadership looks like. If this story stayed with you, share it. Let someone who's been told you don't belong know that they do. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Because we're not done. There are more doors to open and more stories waiting to be heard.